In this chapter, we are going to be taking a broad overview of communication studies as a whole. We're going to start by looking at communication in its history and its different forms, and then move into the transactional model of communication, talk about several different principles of communication, before finally talking about being competent in our communication. So first, let's take a look at the history of communication. We as humans have been communicating with each other for several thousand years, and the first era of communication that we have is the talking era. And this was how we communicated before the time 3500 BCE. And this was the 150,000 year period of human existence where talking was our only form of communication aside from gestures and facial expressions. It was the only way that humans had to relay information to one another. It was how we told the history of our people, and it was how we told each other that we should eat this berry but can't eat that one, and those sorts of things. The only way that we had to communicate that type of information was through talking until we reached the manuscript era, which was approximately from 3500 BCE to 1450 CE. So we spanned several centuries there. And beginning around this time, we started to mark a turn from an oral to a written culture. So we started to write things down. Rather than telling our history through the oral language, we started to tell it through written books that were written by specific people in specific places. Not everyone had access to this written information, but we started to collect that history and we started to have a record of that history in this manuscript era. And then we moved into the print era, starting in 1450 and progressing until about 1850 CE. And this era was marked by the invention of the printing press, which led to a much wider distribution of written texts. So Gutenberg invented the printing press, and suddenly all of these written texts, like the Bible, for example, were readily available for the general public. And the general public started to be able to read these types of texts. They weren't just for an elite class of people anymore. They were written for the common folk. So it gave us the ability to mass produce written texts and spread communication much more quickly and much more widely as well. The print era led us into the audiovisual era, which spanned from about 1850 until 1990. And this was marked by the invention of things like the telegram, the telephone, and the television, and the radio as well. So we saw this progress through this time period, right? We started off with the telegram, where we were able to send messages over cables using specific systems like the Morse code system. Right, we were able to send specific messages across large spans of the world. They even put cables underneath the Atlantic Ocean so that we could send messages from Europe to America and back again. And then that led to the radio, where we were able to mass communicate with others. So we could hear the news on the radio and listen to radio programs and things like that. Which then led into the telephone. We were able to pick up a receiver and hear someone's voice on the other end rather than having to interpret lines and dashes and things like that. And then finally, through the late 1950s until the 1990s, we had the television era, where again, we were able to get messages out very quickly to a mass audience, and people were able to, for example, see newscasters and understand what was happening in the world just then. And finally, that brings us to the internet era, which is from 1990 until the present. And this features the most rapid type of communication that we have to date, with every progression that we went through here, from manuscript to print to audiovisual to the internet, we got faster and faster with the way that we could spread that information. And nowadays, information can be spread at the click of a finger. It's so fast, and both information and misinformation can be spread in this really quick way, and it spreads like wildfire in some cases, right? Things go viral all the time. And so, as you can see, communication as a study has spanned several thousands of years, and when we tend to think of communication, our brains tend to just think of the internet era, but there is so much more history there. And it's important to understand where we began so that we can understand how we got to where we are today.